Story 1. The Man Behind the Chairs. When I was in the 5th grade, my class went on a field trip to a small rural historical museum about an hour away from our school. The day was gray and overcast, with the occasional raindrop tapping lightly on the bus windows as we drove. The museum itself was a modest building, not large, but it had a collection of exhibits showcasing the town's history. Artifacts from settlers and a few taxidermy animals scattered throughout the rooms. While the museum wasn't exactly the most exciting place for kids my age, I still found the stories and old photos interesting, especially the ones of the town's origins, which felt more like something out of a horror novel than a history lesson. Despite the museum's cool, historical charm, I never felt like I fit in with the rest of my classmates. I was always more of a quiet kid, keeping to myself, and my teachers could tell I wasn't really interacting with the others, but they didn't seem to know what to make of me. I didn't have many friends at that point, and I was just starting to feel the effects of the isolation. It was when the class split into smaller groups to tour different parts of the museum that I decided to slip away. No one was paying attention to me, so I quietly wandered off down a dimly lit hallway. The museum's lighting was outdated, with heavy, dusty curtains on the windows that cast the place in a gloomy, old-fashioned atmosphere. The carpet was this dark, worn red, and the air smelled faintly of must and age. The walls were lined with displays of old farm tools, worn photographs of the town's founders, and other historical knick-knacks. My attention wandered to a particular corner where they kept a large display of taxidermy animals. Some of the animals were bizarre to look at, like a long-dead fox with its glassy eyes staring vacantly at me. I felt a weird mix of fascination and discomfort as I studied them. But then, something caught my eye, a man. He was crouched behind a stack of wooden chairs near the back of the room, seemingly hidden, as if he was waiting for something or someone. At first, I thought he might be one of the museum staff or even another visitor, but something about him felt off. He was dressed in an old, dark jacket that looked out of place for the weather, and his face was pale and gaunt. There was an eerie, almost predatory quality to the way he watched me. I didn't know why, but I didn't immediately run or go back to my group. Instead, I nervously laughed, thinking he might be joking around or doing something weird for attention. When he came out from behind the chairs, though, his expression didn't change. There was no smile, no sign of playfulness. He just walked toward me, slow and deliberate, as though there was no hurry. "Where did your group go?" he asked in a hushed voice, his words not entirely friendly, but more like an order than a question. I wasn't sure what to do, but I mumbled something about not knowing. He didn't say anything else at first, just grabbed my arm firmly and said, "Come with me." His grip was unnervingly tight. At that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. I don't know why I didn't pull away or scream. Maybe I thought it was some kind of mistake or some weird misunderstanding, but he tugged me toward the back exit of the museum. My stomach churned as we walked, and I could feel the weight of panic rising inside me. We reached the exit door, which led to a small back alley behind the museum, filled with dumpsters and benches. The sky outside was darker, and the rain had picked up slightly. I thought he might be taking me to the front or leading me back to the group, but as soon as we stepped outside, his grip tightened. He wasn't walking toward the parking lot. Instead, he was heading straight for the trees, the woods just beyond the museum grounds. I froze. My heart raced as he began pulling me with more force, trying to drag me into the woods. It wasn't just that he was pulling me. There was something about the way he was moving, like he had planned this all along. My legs were stiff with fear, and I couldn't understand why my body wasn't reacting, why I wasn't screaming or running. Just as I felt like I couldn't hold on any longer, I heard a woman scream from the other side of the fence. "Help! Help!" It was one of the teachers yelling frantically. The man immediately let go of my arm and turned, darting into the woods as quickly as he had grabbed me. I stood there, frozen for a moment, too scared to move, until the teachers came running outside. They must have seen the man and realized what had happened, because they rushed to pull me back inside, scolding me as they did. They were visibly shaken. They immediately called the authorities, and before long, a couple of police cars arrived, the officers asking questions and taking statements. The field trip was officially canceled early, and my classmates and I were hurried back onto the bus. The school officials were visibly shaken, and I overheard them talking about how it was too risky to continue with the trip. The teachers all seemed to be on edge, no doubt worried about the close call. My parents were called to pick me up from school, and by the time I got home, I was still too frightened to speak. I kept replaying the events in my head over and over, not fully understanding what had happened. But as the police launched an investigation into the incident, I learned that the man was known to the authorities, a local transient who had a history of disturbing behavior around children. He was caught a few days later, and I felt a sickening relief that the encounter hadn't escalated further. We were all sent home early from school that day, and I don't think anyone on the bus spoke a word during the ride back. The teachers did their best to reassure us, but I was too shaken to feel comforted. I could still hear that man's voice in my head, feel the coldness of his grip, and see the way he watched me like I was some prey. As the bus pulled away from the museum, I glanced out the window. For a brief moment, I thought I saw him again, standing at the edge of the woods, watching the bus drive off. The rest of the ride home was a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the woods, the way he'd pulled me toward them, and the terrifying thought that something far worse could have happened. All I could do was hope that I would never cross paths with him again.
Story 2. The Strange Woman at the Resort. I used to be in the Ridgeview School District in Oregon during my middle and high school years. It was a relatively affluent area, and they offered a lot of exciting field trips for students. I was part of the choir, and every year, we'd get at least 1 or 2 trips as a class. The trip in question was when I was a sophomore. We took a trip to Blue Ridge Pines Resort in northern Oregon, a place known for its scenic beauty, especially during the fall when the leaves changed colors. The bus ride there was a few hours long, and I was with my friend Emily. She and I had shared a room on the trip. We figured it would be a pretty quiet time since it was already November, and the resort wasn't exactly teeming with tourists. We arrived at Blue Ridge Pines Resort late in the afternoon, and it felt much colder than we anticipated, as the weather had shifted quickly. We had 3 full days planned for the trip, with 4 chaperones, though they didn't seem too interested in keeping a close eye on us. We were mostly on our own, just having to check in with them about what activities we were going to do. For the record, not all the students got rooms next to each other, but Emily and I were fortunate enough to be in one near a set of sliding doors that led to a patio overlooking the lake below. It was nice to sit by the window and gaze at the moon reflecting on the still water. Around 10 p.m., we decided to take a break from our conversations and just relax in bed. We left the blinds open to enjoy the view of the lake. We didn't think anything would happen, but it wasn't long before we started feeling uneasy. The hour passed slowly as we shifted restlessly in bed, occasionally talking in whispers. Suddenly, I heard Emily let out a scream that pierced through the stillness. I jumped out of bed, confused and frightened. I thought it might have been some sort of joke, but then I turned toward the door. What I saw was like something out of a horror movie. A tall, thin woman, her grayish hair hanging down in strands, was standing outside the door. She was pressed against the glass, her hands cupped around her face, trying to peer inside. Without a sound, she moved away from the door. Emily and I exchanged a stunned look, both of us not sure if we'd imagined it. Still, I could see the fear in her eyes, and it was clear we weren't hallucinating. We didn't run out immediately. Instead, we stood frozen for a moment before cautiously stepping outside. We checked the surrounding area, but there was no sign of the woman. The path leading to each room was empty, the grass around us still, and the hill down to the lake was quiet. We both knew what we saw. though it wasn't a trick of the light. The next day, we didn't mention it to the chaperones, but we did tell the other girls in our group. They were skeptical at first, but we were insistent. Night fell once again, and we returned to the room after another full day of activities. This time, we made sure to shut the blinds, though neither of us could shake the uneasy feeling in our chests. Emily fell asleep before me, but I found it hard to sleep, tossing and turning in the dark. After about half an hour, I woke up to the stillness of the room. Something felt wrong. I sat up in bed, trying to adjust to the silence. I called Emily's name softly, but she didn't answer. I turned to look at her bed, but something was blocking my view. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I slowly turned to the side, and there, standing over me, was the same tall woman. She had a cold, detached expression, and as she stood there, she muttered, "Your back door was unlocked." Then, without another word, she turned and walked back out. I froze, too terrified to move. My limbs felt heavy, as if the very air around me was suffocating. I finally managed to shake Emily awake, whispering urgently to her about what happened. We immediately locked the back door, shut the blinds, and agreed to stay up for the rest of the night. It was already 4 a.m., so we figured we might as well stay awake. The next morning, at breakfast, we were still rattled by what had happened. When we returned to our room to gather our things, we saw the woman again. This time, she was in the neighboring room, sitting on the bed with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the door. We hurried to the front desk to report it to the staff, but they seemed dismissive at first. Eventually, we convinced them to check out the woman's room with us. What we found was unsettling. The woman was still sitting there, and there was an older man in the room with her. The staff said they had mental health issues, but something about them felt deeply wrong. They didn't seem like people who belonged at a family resort. Despite our insistence, the staff refused to ask them to leave. We were frustrated and uncomfortable, and the situation escalated to the point where our chaperones argued with the staff, ultimately cutting the trip short. We packed up quickly and left, both Emily and I relieved to be out of there. It wasn't until later that I realized how much that experience haunted me. The woman's cold, glassy eyes, the way she had watched us so intently, and her strange, almost robotic behavior, those memories lingered far longer than I ever expected. I didn't think I'd ever be so happy to leave a place. And though I never spoke to Emily about it again, we both knew something had happened that we couldn't explain. It was one of those experiences you never forget, no matter how much time passes.